Well, that would take a book on its own. So
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try.
What are the most significant moments of your life?
I think the first thing is that I was blessed to marry a man who has become my friend, my mentor, my lover, my everything. His name is Sergio. We've been married for 58 years. The second one are my two wonderful children. And the third thing is my four grandchildren, whom I adore. They're all over the world now. They're adults, and I could well be a great granny, but no such luck. I have a fourth, having received a knighthood from the President of Italy for my work in the Italian community from when I was a young child. The recognition of that has actually made me really, very happy, and I'm actually thrilled to have been recognized by the Italian government.
Could you tell us about your life story in a few minutes?
My life was very much involved with family. I worked for my parents. They had their own company. My father manufactured paint, which grew and grew, and it became a sort of middle-sized company. We made industrial paints. We manufactured paint for Fiat, and we moved our factory to Roslyn, Johannesburg. I had this whole commute backwards and forwards from Roslyn to the Johannesburg. I got married quite young. I was 21 years old, and I had children immediately, with the result that it was a sort of a half-day job, sort of 90 kilometers a day. When the children started going to school, it became more and more difficult for me to work at the factory. But I did work for them for 17 years. In the meantime, my husband, of course, had a meteoric career. And of course, because of that, I had to actually follow him as much as possible and give him as much attention and support, which was always required of me as a hostess, as a wife. So a lot of it was taken up with that. We were the youngest people around, and we were dealing with people in their 50s and 60s, and we were in our 20s. And having an Italian background, of course, it made it easy for me because I was used to catering and I was used to having people around. My parents were very social, with the result that I grew up in this fantastic Italian, South African medley of everything, from cuisine to music to everything. And my house before I got married was always full of people. And my house after I got married was also always full of people. We were well-to-do. I mean, we also came down with very little, but we worked hard. And we achieved a lot. It was an exciting, exciting life I had, filled with tragedy, filled with very serious tragedy, both health-wise, children-wise. I lost a son. My husband nearly died. He then got blown up on the border. We really went through some tragic times, but we're still here to tell the tale. My husband and I have always supported each other.
What are your biggest achievements and your biggest regrets?
No regret. No. It's pointless to have regret. One can't have regret. If it's a mistake, it's a mistake. It's gone. It's in the past. Just don't do it again. But don't regret it. It's a lesson learned. I think my success was mainly family-oriented. When I came to Cape Town, it was actually a turning point in my life. The shackles of the past were no longer with me. I came to a new city that I didn't know anybody. So what I did is I went to the Italian consulate. I said, if you don't mind, I'd like to do some projects, because I'd done a lot of projects with the Italian South African Cultural Centre. We did 2 or 3 operas a year with dinners and this and that, always at the State Theatre in Pretoria. I had organized dances for my father when it was the president of the Associazione Assistenziale Italiana in Johannesburg. So I came here and I thought, well, I can continue with my events management. Nobody ever paid me a cent to do it, just by the way. The first thing I did, it was the anniversary of Marconi. I knew the guy who knew the Marconi story and who had all the experiments of the Marconi. So I phoned him and I said, come to Cape Town, come and do it for me. And so he came out here and I went just on my own, I went to the Department of Chemistry, and then I went to UCT, UWC, I went to Stellenbosch, and then I went to the bus companies, and then I hired all the buses for the children to go and hear the lectures at the universities. I started to be known for, organizing things. And then I was introduced to the International Women's Club and the Dante Alighieri. So I became president of the Dante Alighieri. That was moribund. And we revived it a little bit, and now it's doing quite well. I then became president of the International Women's Club, which brought me into contact with 200 women. And it was like a breath of fresh air. It was absolutely fantastic. Even before I came down here, was the biggest project of my life, and that was the history of the Italians in South Africa. Because I had been here for so long, I knew a lot of the old families, and so I was a perfect candidate to go and knock on all the doors, and I collected a whole whack of photographs and stories, and I took it to the Palm Museum, the Stellenbosch Conservatoire, the Baxter Theatre Foyer, and the Italian Club in Cape Town, and it was here for nearly 2.5 months, that exhibition, and I gave lectures on all the photographs.
Could you share about your life experience in Italy?
Well, that would take a book on its own. So, all right, I was born in Piemonte, in Provincia di Torino, during the war. The only thing I do remember as a child in Italy, of any consequence, strangely enough, is when we were bombed in 1945 in June by the Allies. I do remember the big bang and the big crash when the Allied troops actually came over. They had made a bomb shelter for us under the house, and there were 2 doors, one on each end. I remember distinctly, and I was only 2.5 years old, but I can see them in my mind now. The 2 doors were just blown out. We had this wind coming through this tunnel. My mother put cotton wool in my ears, scarf round my neck, and told me to go and lie under the bench and go to sleep, which is what I did. I don't remember anything else.
What led you and your family to South Africa?
My father was fed up with the political situation in Italy, and he was going to go to Brazil. My grandmother, my mother's mother, said, listen, I've got a sister who lives in Johannesburg. Would you mind going to South Africa instead of Brazil so that my daughter has family? So my father says, I don't care where I go as long as I get out of here. So we came to South Africa. The decision was made.
How was your journey to South Africa?
My mother was a very energetic, very highly educated person as well. And she refused because she heard all these stories about Dakota aircraft. And she said, I am not coming in a 1-engine aircraft. My father said, that's fine. So we leave with Granny and Grandpa and the other Granny, except we didn't bring the dog. And so we got down to Rome. And now we get to the airport, and there's nobody at the airport. It's absolutely pitch black. There's nobody around. The gates are closed. So my mother said, but this is impossible. Eventually we found somebody, and they said, oh, no, you've got to go to Champino down there somewhere. God knows it was far away. The whole troop went off to Champino Airport, and there was a Dakota. My mother almost didn't get on. And our first stop was Khartoum, into the Sudan, right on the Nile River. The ladder to come down, the stairs to come down off the aircraft are not high enough. You know, the Dakotas are very high. We had to jump off. But there was a guy standing on the platform. So my mother takes me by the hand. Now we're standing at the doorway. And I see this figure, black as the ace of spades, white turban, white kaftan, white teeth and white eyes. This is the first time I've seen a black person in my life. Looks up at me, and in perfect Italian, he says, Salta, piccola, salta, ti prendo. And I looked at my mother and I said, Ma mi sporca, mamma. È nero, mi sporca. Mother said, no, cara, non ti sporca, salta, salta. Questo qui si è messo a ridere. He was so amused by my reaction to him that he said, come. And I jumped into his arms and he just held me tight. And this was my first impression of Africa.
Could you tell us about your life experience in South Africa?
Came down when I was 5.5, went to school almost immediately, became the first Italian head girl of Yeovil Convent in Johannesburg. Because we were bullied. I was also bullied like hell because I didn't speak English and I didn't eat the right same food, and my sandwiches were always filled with salami, and I would swap them. My mother was so furious. I would swap them for sandwich spread, which is that ghastly stuff that tastes of half of mayonnaise with pickles and things in it. Obviously, when I went to school for the first time and didn't speak English, I was bullied, there's no question. And I was small, and I had dark hair and dark eyes, and I was the enemy. You know, I was Italian. And there were very few of us in those days, really very few. The community was very small. So I got chased home many times from these Vikings. They were huge, big, you know, the Valkyrie, with the blonde hair and the blue eyes, and here I was, this tiny little dark little thing. So my father taught me how to punch. He says, when they come for you, you give them a punch. As I said, I was my father's daughter and his son. So I was taught how to throw a punch. I never did, by the way. But nonetheless, I knew how to defend myself. And I could run quite fast. So my father decided that because I was having a hard time at school, he'd buy me a dog, a tiny little puppy Ridgeback, because I loved my dog in Italy and I was really, really upset. But this Ridgeback grew, didn't he? And he grew and he grew and he grew. Eventually, I was sleeping on the floor and the dog was sleeping on the bed because both of us didn't fit in a single bed. I wasn't a terribly good scholar. I really didn't enjoy school at all. It was so boring. I found it terribly boring. I barely passed every year. It was just not my thing, which just goes to prove anybody can pass an exam. But to understand what you've actually written is a completely different story. I could pass an exam, but, really those things just brought me to death. Johannesburg was a thriving city. It had a pulse. Years later, I went to New York and got that same sensation of, a big city pulsing with energy. When we arrived, believe it or not, some of the houses in Brampton were still made with the stone bottom, and then the house itself was still corrugated iron. There were still traces of the original mining town that it was. Hillbrow had just started being constructed, and this became the first high buildings, and it was fantastic to see it grow, And then, of course, we were a British colony in those days. Everything had to do with the Queen. So when she was crowned in 1953, they made this huge crown in lights on Clarendon Circle, and we would all drive up and go round the circle and look at the beautiful, British crown. So we were brought up in a British system. One of the first memories that I have of Hillbrow, they used to use the prisoners to go and dig up the pavements and the streets. They would pick and open the door, and they would go, bah, sholoza, bah. This red soil would come pouring out of these holes. It was impressive, It went in no time at all. It was a great time to be in South Africa. I saw the growth.
What do you think are the best qualities of Italy and South Africa? And what are their differences?
I think food. I have so enjoyed the fusion between the Italian cuisine and the South African cuisine. The South African cuisine, of course, is very, very mixed. It's from Indian cuisine, British cuisine, Dutch cuisine, German cuisine. It's a mushmash of all those cultures into one. And the Italian is ever so pure. We all know, the Italian cuisine's got to be ever so pure. And what I've done is I've mixed the whole bloody thing up.
What does it mean to you to be an Italian in South Africa?
Being Italian in South Africa is lovely now. The young Italians that come out here are enthused by the beauty and by the welcoming attitude of people in South Africa, quite rightly so. Everybody thinks Italy is wonderful. When we came out here, they all thought Italy was the enemy. It's a completely different mindset that you have today as when we came. It's a very different story altogether.
If you could describe your life in one word, what would it be?
Love.
If you could share a message or an advice for people younger than you, what would it be?
Oh, it's very difficult to give advice, unless you've asked for it. I wouldn't advise anybody off the cuff. If I need to tell them something, I'll just tell them straight out. I'm not going to advise them. I'm going to just tell them. Advice is a different thing altogether. You've got to make your own teeth,
What does happiness mean to you?
To give of myself to others. Whatever they need, I'm there to give. I'm a very fortunate person because I have an eclectic brain. I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. But whatever I know, I like to impart to others and bring them with me on a journey of discovery. As I speak now, I've got a new lease on life for myself. I've had problems, so I have to have hearing aids, so I don't hear that well. I've had a stroke, so I lost my singing voice. I haven't touched the piano for 55 years, and I'm the choir master of the choir here at my retirement resort. I'm not going into the classics. We don't have voices for that anymore, but we do have voices for soft rock. Songs from Foreigner, Wings, R&M, and which are modern rock, you know what I mean? So we can make a mess of it and it still sounds fine. We are doing so well, and we just have an enormous amount of fun.